Thank you very much, Sue. I appreciate that. And I also appreciate Harker and Meg. Thank you very much for keeping me up to date and helping me out behind the scenes and getting some stuff ready for today. I very much appreciate all three of you. As you can tell, or maybe you can't tell, COVID has kept Paula and I pretty close to home. The gray hair was on my head long before COVID came along, but it wasn't anywhere near as long as it is at this point. We haven't had a haircut, I think, in about 4 or 5 months. And at this point, I would turn around, but my hair curls in the back. So I'm not gonna turn around so anybody can see that. But we are thankful that we still have an opportunity to share with you, even though we're not there in person. Being able to do it virtually is still quite an honor. Before I begin sharing with you today the lesson, I thought of something from my health education background that goes along with what we're going through today with COVID. And that is many years ago, and I can't remember the exact date, I think it was in the 1800s, that Edward Jenner came up with a vaccine, one of the first true vaccines. And it was based on his using a cowpox victim. And he would inoculate people with the cowpox and they became immune to it. Cow in, I believe, Latin is vacca, V-A-C-C-A, and don't quote me on that, but I believe that's the Latin meaning, and that's where we got the word vaccine. But just like today, there's all sorts of misinformation going around. There was misinformation and fear at the time that he created the cowpox vaccine. One of the fears was that if you took it, you would get cow-like tendencies. And the other was that if you were inoculated, you would begin, I have to laugh, you might grow a horn. So even then, all sorts of crazy stuff was talked about. We haven't changed very much, have we? Well, today I really want to, I'm going to share something that's close to my heart because, as Sue said, I've heard an awful lot of people talk about science and religion as if they ought to be separate. But as many of you know, Charles Fillmore was very much into science, and he did not turn away from science or religion. He thought the two should go together. And so I'm going to look at a couple of ahas that I've had over the last couple of years about science and religion. And for me, it all began when I was in seminary, and I want to share something with you. And what you're seeing is what I thought when I looked at the Bible and religion, I thought 4 things happened. We're in the land of darkness, then we go across the Sea of Reeds into the land of law, then we pass over the Jordan into the land of love, and eventually we end up in what I call the land of being. And these 4 lands have a counterpart that if I hold this up and we were able to get it at the bottom, which is what each land is. And I'll just go ahead with that. The land of darkness is where we start off as an individual, as Elle said today. Are we afraid? Do we have fear? Do we break things into duality? Them versus us. We're right, they're wrong. Good and bad. In other words, black and white. The land of law begins to teach us new ways of looking at things, opens our minds up. The land of love is where we then step into a fullness a little bit more, and we begin to accept others. And then there's the land of being, where we're in our full religious experience of God, in which everything we see as God, we know it's okay, and we're guided by that spirit. So that's what I created. And it's a beautiful map. I'll try to get it out to everybody at some point. What I discovered was that is exactly the same map that appears in most modern human development theories. If you look at Abraham Maslow, Frederick Hertzberg, let's see, James Fowler, Holland and Perry, all these human development models have exactly the same process going on, and almost word for word, the exact same experience. Science and theology are working together. So basically, science and our religious experience have stages that we go through, exactly alike. They may call them something different. They may use different methods to look at it, but science and our religious experience all progress along those lines. Charles Fillmore even says in, I think it's the Mysteries of Genesis, God created that from which the earth evolved. He even saw and didn't have any problem with science and evolution, because he said, even if God didn't create the world as a lot of fundamental Christians believe, it was still God that created that from which everything else has evolved. So he believes science, God is still behind it. That was my first insight. My second insight was that religion and science are looking for the same thing. Now you might say, no, we're looking for God. Well, are we looking for God? I thought we were supposed to have already found it and living it. The movie Contact, I don't know how many of you saw it. Wonderful movie with Jodie Foster. There is a scene near the end of the movie where Palmer Joss, the minister, goes out to a car. Jodie is sitting on the inside, and a reporter asks him something. He says, "What do you believe?" And Palmer says something very profound. As a person of faith, I'm bound by a different covenant than Dr. Arroway. But our goal is one and the same, the pursuit of truth. Albert Einstein says almost exactly the same thing, and I think most people would agree. Albert was a man who was both spiritual and fairly scientific. Quote, all religions, arts, and sciences are branches of the same tree. All of these are directed toward ennobling man's life, lifting it from the sphere of mere physical existence and leading the individual toward freedom. The quest for objective truth and knowledge is man's highest and eternal aim. Our friend Charles Fillmore says something very similar. Unity is a link in the great educational movement inaugurated by Jesus the Christ. And our objective, unity's objective, is to discern the truth in Christianity and live it. So all religion and science is about truth. We just do it in a different way. So that's number two. Number three, we're supposed to use our minds. Even Jesus, I'll just start off with Jesus. I mean, let's get the big guns here. Jesus in Matthew 4:17, he's gone through his baptism with John. He's gone out into the desert and gone through the desert experience. And now he's about to begin his ministry. So what happens? Quote, from that time on, Jesus begins to preach, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near. Now, we're not talking about repentance in the sense of mea culpa, my sins and things like that. The word Jesus uses in Greek is metanoia. which means to change one's mind or to think differently. So even Jesus is calling for us to use our minds, to think, to change our minds, to grow. And Paul in, I think it's Romans, says exactly the same thing, backing Jesus up in that sense and saying, be ye transformed. How? By the renewing of your mind. So, like science, we in religion and theology ought to be renewing our minds and our thoughts all the time and not get trapped into that land of darkness where we don't change our minds. This is the way it is, and I don't care. Don't confuse me with facts. We're supposed to be challenging our religion, testing our religion, asking the questions and going deeper, because there's still more to learn, even in our theology. Next, what I learned were mystics were pretty smart. They weren't just ordinary people. I looked into, I know this sounds crazy, 109 Christian mystics. And why? Well, we have time on our hands now. We're not out traveling. So I have time to read and study. 109 mystics, Christian. And what I learned was this: almost all of them, nearly every single one of them, had a science background. They were either in astronomy, chemistry, medicine, biology, math, geometry, art, music, literature. These were not just ordinary people. These are people who had studied and developed their minds. Now, they expressed them differently. Some did it through visions, others did it through writings, poetry, in many different ways. But they had an open mind and a sharp mind. And I looked at it kind of like this: if God's going to use you, it's better that you have something that God can really use. And so they develop their minds. Next, I looked at my experience with this. Oh, I skipped something, but I'm going to go ahead with this. When you do this, I think I said it, they express themselves each in their own way, but they did it through their gifts and through their personality. And I had the same experience. I've taken a lot of personality tests, neuro-linguistic programming, the Enneagram, Strong-Campbell interest inventory, what's the big one? Myers-Briggs. And recently, or a few years back, I took the Keirsey temperament sorter. Now, if you look at all the tests I've taken, there's a trend. And I was kind of ignoring the trend because I thought I ought to be doing something else. And the trend kept pointing me in one direction, especially Keirsey. I didn't like my exam score on Keirsey, and I'm sure all of you run into things like this where you go, that's not me. I scored as a idealist healer, and I thought I was something else, so I went back and retook the test, hoping to get a different score. Same score. And I thought, well, okay, I'll go with it. Let's see what happens. I opened the material as to other people who are idealist healers, and the first person listed was the man that I have always considered my number one go-to teacher, Albert Schweitzer. And I said, well, I could do worse. So what I found was many of the people who are idealist teachers and healers were the people I was already just fascinated with and felt a kinship with. Aldous Huxley, Albert Camus, Margaret Mead, Abraham Maslow, Gandhi, Buddha, Charles Rogers, Karen Armstrong. Those were all the idealists that are in my profile. And I was already thinking, acting, and reading them. So Someday, what I want you to do is to look at who you are, what your skills are, what you got, and try to find one of those tests. I would strongly recommend Kiersey because it's free, and find those people for yourself. Next, good science and good religion have always worked together. It's not something new. Modern brain science, all those development models, they've been around for a long time. They've always worked together with religion if we allow them. Andrew Newberg and Mark Robert Waldman are two authors that have written a bunch of books on brain science and religion. How God changes your brain, why we believe what we believe. And the one I like is how enlightenment changes your brain. This one really got me because what they did was they identified what happens to mystics and others in terms of an enlightenment experience and broke it down into 5 things, including the last being this experience that is so remarkable, it literally changes your life. You don't think the same way again. They tested Catholic nuns. They then went and ran tests on Buddhist monks. They went to evangelicals, what I would call mid-America type Christians, shaman and others from natural religions, Hindus, and last but not least, atheists. And they all experienced the Enlightenment. They had this transformative experience, almost word for word, except somebody would say, well, it was Jesus or it was God or it was something. They had different words to express it, but they all experienced it. Waldman and Newberg, I don't know if you know, but they write a monthly column in the Science of Mind, and I've got just about everything they've ever written. And what they describe is what you and I should be practicing, because they give specific details on how you can reach that state of enlightenment. And that's science. Now, Tony Robbins writes in the most recent Science of Mind on meditation, and he gives about 7 or 8 different types of meditation. We're going to use some of that today in meditation after I finish. He says you should pick a form of meditation that suits your particular style. Just like the mystics, they all picked something that worked with who they were and what they had to share. They didn't just follow anybody, they picked something personal. And that's what I think each of us should do. He described mindfulness meditation if you want to do the quiet type, movement meditation if you like to walk, go out in nature, mantra if you like to do Om or make up your own, transcendental, all day, and even guided. And each of us should pick according to our own need and our personality. Don't just do it because somebody else does it, but look into who you are, just like the mystics did, and match it with who you are. And that kind of, let me summarize this. Good science and good religion evolves. It doesn't just pop up there and it's all in one piece. It's evolving over time, and there is a process you have to go through to get to the highest levels. So don't be discouraged. Stay with the process. Number 2, science and religion both seek truth, and they encourage using the mind. A sharp mind can help. The leaders, the people who have gone the farthest and opened the most doors, are those who had a good mind and used it along with their own personal talent, their skills, their ability, and their personality, so that it came together beautifully. They didn't try to be somebody else. And there are examples of those people. And I want to close this with one who is, in addition to Albert Schweitzer, this is one of my favorites. I don't know if you've ever heard of George Washington Carver. He was an African-American. They're not quite certain of his birth date because he was born right there at the end or during the Civil War in Missouri, which was a slave state. So there's some confusion about when he was born, but he was born. His parents had several other children, but they were kidnapped at a certain point. He was finally rescued and brought back and adopted by a family. Now, can you just, first of all, imagine that as a young person? When he got back and the family started to raise him, he had an insatiable desire to learn, open his mind and learn, be educated, but it was forbidden in the South. He was unable to go to a school right off, so his family educated him in private so nobody knew. If he'd been caught, he might have been hung, or worse, tortured. As he grew older, he had an opportunity finally to go to school, but he had to walk 10 miles to the little town that had a school. The teacher took him under her wing and worked with him for a number of years. And just before he graduated and left, I want to read what she said to him. And George Washington Carver kept this in the uppermost part of his mind all through his life. You must learn all that you can, then go back out into the world and give your learning back to the people. And this became a kind of a motto, a vision, a mission for George Washington Carver, to use both his religious belief and his science belief, but always returning it to the people. I don't know if you know, George Washington Carver went on to teach at Tuskegee Institute. And if you ever get to read about his life story, he used to take his class out into the dump in order to find glass and jars and things that they could use for their science class. That's how bad it was. But he continued to teach and he continued to study and research. George Washington Carver discovered over 300 uses for the peanut, soybean, sweet potato, and the pecan, or if you're from the South, pecan. He literally saved the South by coming up with and being able to teach people about rotation of crops. Cotton was depleting the soil, and by bringing in the peanut, it was able to replenish the nutrients in the soil, and they rotated their crops that can basically go on forever without depleting the soil. He made dyes, paints, plastics, and even fuel for cars. Henry Ford even planted soybeans because he found that the plastic that the soybeans produced and the gasoline that it produced was better than most what we get out of the ground. If you ever get a chance, there's a picture of them. Ford created, I think, a few models with a plastic trunk created by the soybean, and they take a baseball bat and they can hit it and it just bounces off even nearly 100 years later. Paul and I saw a video one day of George Washington Carver, and it evidently, at one point, he even communicated with Unity Farm. We don't know who on the farm, probably Charles Fillmore, but may have had some influence on the vegetarian movement within Unity and the raising of food on the farm so that they could take it into town and use it with the vegetarian restaurant in Kansas City. Now, this man lived a very simple life, and until his dying days, he lived in a dormitory on the campus. One of the women came up to him one day. She was African American, and she said, "Dr. Carver, you have done so much for your people." And George Washington Carver looked at her. He said, "Madam, they're all my people." You can combine science and religion. Science that's compassionate, religion that uses the mind can be a powerful combination, and one I think that we've had all along, and I hope we have well into the future. Thank you. I want to do a meditation based on Robbins and the science and research that I've been reading. It's going to be a little different than you normally get because it's going to go through several stages. But I want you to go along with me by, first of all, just closing your eyes and listening to my voice. Let's begin by just taking a few deep breaths. And I don't want you to just, I want a deep breath where your diaphragm goes down. Your belly pooches out. Take a deep breath and then let it out. At least just two, maybe. I don't want you to pass out. Now wait. Just relax. And now, still with your eyes closed if you can, take normal breaths for the next 30 or 45 seconds, but I want you to be aware of your breaths. And if you can, just think to yourself, I'm breathing in and out. In and out. And now for the next 30 seconds or so, just be aware of whether you're breathing in or out. And if a stray thought comes into your mind, just get back to looking at your breath. In or out. And now, I want you to take just a moment to bring to mind someone that you love very much. Bring them into your conscious mind as vividly as you possibly can. See them right there with you. Feel their presence. And someone once asked me, well, what if I have a pet? Well, for goodness sakes, yes. If you have a pet you love very much, put them in your consciousness. Hold on to them. See them vividly, feel them, the emotion that you have with them. And now gently let them go, at least for the time being. And one last type of meditation, because you've really been through 4 different types. One more that the scientists say work beautifully in stopping your brain from chatter. That might be a little embarrassing, might not be easy to do. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to yawn. Take a moment. It doesn't have to, maybe you can't do it real, you have to fake it for a second, but I want you to, oh, oh, oh. A couple of yawns. One more. Oh. Ooh, that was real. Okay, open your eyes. There we go. Every one of those is scientifically based to do different things to different parts of your brain in order to open up the mind and to settle the emotions, the heart, so that we can open up. And they're all covered in the Science of Mind articles by Newberg and Waldman. And all I did was snatch them out of there and use them. But that's how easy it is, and how wonderful it is to use science and what we know in religion, which, by the way, almost all the science articles I'm now reading emphasize, if you can, meditate. So there you have it. Thank you. Each and every one of us is a student of truth. And as a student of truth, we have nothing to fear. The Spirit of truth will guide us. The Spirit of truth will surround us. And what we will have is the Spirit of truth, no matter what we face. Thank you, God. And thank you, Spirit of truth.